I remember well my father tell me stories of before, of the risings and rebellions, Fitzgerald's and Wolftown, the land wars and the slum lords, imperial penal law, how 1,000,000 died of hunger from the great ungodly war. My father died an old man when I was just a boy, and he says to me now, Michael, oh, right before he died, one day you'll be a great man with a hunger in your heart. You'll do great things for Ireland, oh, you'll try and win her back. Oh, my name is Michael Collins, on the rebel county cure, where I learned an Irish vocation, how to stand up and to talk. I came toe to toe with an empire and a pen in my hand, signed my life away for Ireland.
The elections recorded an overwhelming demand for independence, but this was ignored in England. The Irish decided to challenge the empire, which was fresh from Victoria's war. January the 7th, 26 elected Republican representatives met at the Dublin Mansion House and decided to convene Dáil Éireann. Sean T. O'Kelly, George Gavin Duffy and Pierce Beasley were appointed to draft a provisional constitution for the Dáil. Invitations to attend, signed by Count Plunkett, were sent to all elected representatives, regardless of their interest. January the 10th. The new British Cabinet met and kept Lord French in the position of Lord Lieutenant to indicate that their policy would be a continuation of military rule. January 21st. The first Dáil met at 3:30 p.m. Count Plunkett proposed that Cathal Brugha preside because De Valera and Griffith were in jail.
Also in 1919, when Cathal Brugha, it was Michael Collins actually said, an easy man to admire, when he stood up and when he gave that speech. In the 1919 document, they actually wrote into it that no food was to be exported from the country unless all the children were fed.
So this is the Mansion House on Dawson Street in Dublin, and this was where on the 21st of January 1919 the first Dáil sat. They had their meeting inside in the round room, and this was effectively this was now the legitimate government of Ireland.
He didn't like the declaration of the declaration of the principles democratic message, because William Johnson of the Labour Party had drafted that initially. Sean T.O. Kelly had been involved, who was in the IRB. I mean, remember Collins, a lot of these guys, the connection was mainly the IRB.
Yeah.
The IRB was the important ingredient throughout.
You'd imagine that he and Harry Boland should have been present now.
Yeah.
But you can see the respect they had for De Valera and how importantly they regarded getting him out of jail.
It wasn't just a statement.
Yeah.
This was making Irish independence a reality.
Okay.
And people knew that in advance, so they knew if they were voting for that, this is what they wanted.
It was from this building that a message was sent out to the world that, for the second time, you could say the first time in Easter week 1916, that a republic had been declared, but here it had also been declared. But the difference between now in 1919 and 1916 was that now they did have an electoral mandate behind it. It didn't go according to plan. They wanted to send out this huge message to the world that this is 1919, this is post-World War I, this is, President Wilson, saying that things are going to be different now in the world, the whole small nations thing, and this was where they were announcing to the world on that day that a republic has been declared in Ireland with a proper electoral mandate. They wanted journalists here from everywhere. They wanted it to be all over the front pages of the papers the following day. Instead, what did they have? They had the shooting of the two policemen.
Hands up! Hands up!
And they go silent in Antogloch. There's a tiny little article which is, it doesn't even mention Salahead Beg, it just talks about Tipperary volunteers in general.
Okay. Yeah.
A statement from an incarcerated volunteer. And they talk about the need for learn the topography of your district, prepare your plans, almost like go on an operational phase.
Yeah.
But I was shocked by it in a way that there's no reaction to Salahead Beg at all. So it's evident that they were caught on the hop.
you know, the ambush of Solihull Beg on the 21st of January 1919, it did take the shine away from the political agenda that was going on at the time, because after 1916 it doesn't go straight into violence again. And that's the whole thing, that this was a revolution. Violence gets you so far at that point, but then for 2.5 years they followed the democratic programme, but the British just chose to ignore everything.
On Tuglock, the official publication of the Volunteers, proclaimed on the 31st of January 1919 that every volunteer was entitled to use all legitimate methods of warfare against the soldiers and policemen of the English usurper, and to slay them, if necessary, to overcome their resistance.
On January 23rd, Dr. Fogarty, Bishop of Killaloe, said, "The fight for Irish freedom has passed into the hands of the young men of Ireland. And when the young men of Ireland hit back at their oppressors, it is not for old men like me to cry foul." A £1,000 government award for information about the Solihull ambushers remained unclaimed.
They weren't quite ready for it, I don't think, when it happened. And whether the War of Independence could actually have even started at that point is up for debate, really. It may not have happened, but there was certainly a debate, and it seems to back up Dan Breen's assertion that GHQ, IRA GHQ, wanted them out of the country, as they had done in the past with certain men who carried out operation. You know, and then as I said, Dan Breen claims that Mulcahy put pressure on them to get out of the country. But Breen and Tracy were making Sean Tracy, 3rd Tipperary Brigade, were making a statement. They were not leaving. They were in it for the finish.
As a result of this action, South Tipperary was placed under martial law. It was declared a special military area under the Defence of the Realm Act. Richard Mulcahy, in his opinion, had stated that it was an ill-judged action with regrettable and unwarranted features. Collins, however, approved of this action. He thought the IRA or volunteers could use all legitimate methods against the soldiers and policemen of England.
It was going to be a big burden, and then you had the whole story of Lord French and Lord Haldane, you know, trying to get home rule going again, as it had been past its sell-by date by most then, with the Irish Parliamentary Party getting beaten.
Earlier in the month, Michael Collins was down in Cork. On the 5th of January, the foundation of the 3rd Cork Brigade of the IRA was founded. Michael Collins was representing GHQ in Dublin. Liam DC has mentioned that Florence O'Donoghue and Tom Hales were present. They would play a role in the final days of Michael Collins' life 3 years later.
And Mum, how did he obtain such a stranglehold over Dublin Castle with intelligence?
He had it planted, you know. And he was very good at that. And you know, the secret Oathbound Society they belonged to, the IRB. He knew the men he could trust.
Ned Bry and Joe Kavanagh and then Dave Nelligan, these were guys who were in the G division of the Dublin Metropolitan Police.
My name is Anya Broy, and my father is Ned Broy. Yeah, his first station was out in Irishtown because there's a great athletics ground out there, so he was very happy with that. And then he after about 3 or 4 years, then he was into Brunswick Street.
Right. Okay.
And then he was there maybe a year or two before he went into the G division.
Okay.
And he was typing all these reports on his own in the office, which is probably why it worked out.
I think he was a wee bit though frustrated that maybe it wasn't.
Yeah, for a while they weren't acting on them and that, because I mean, here's the DMP man giving you information. I mean, wouldn't you kind of question it?
Absolutely. Ned Broy had been transmitting documents to the Irish Volunteers for some time. He was, however, feeling frustrated. In his witness statement he says, "I knew nothing about Michael Collins. I knew Miss Moira Smart, who has become wife of Michael Foley. We had many talks about Sinn Féin, the insurrection and national activities, and we both solemnly agreed that violence was the only method. One day she said to me, 'You should meet Michael Collins.'"
And they met at 5 Cabra Road, which is the home of Michael Foley.
Yes.
His wife had known my father in as a DMP man. One of his jobs was he had to go out and get all these provisions for the DMP station. So he knew a lot of butchers and grocery people and everything. He had to go out and order this stuff. And he met her and he knew her. She was very involved in everything. She spoke Irish to each other. Right. And that was why he picked that family.
Oh, very good. Is there any misconceptions from the famous Michael Collins movie that you'd like to address?
The only problem I have with it is that they killed him in the film when he actually died in my arms exactly 50 years later, 1972.
How or what did he see in Michael when he first met him? I think he was quite pleased with having met him.
Absolutely. I mean, he had been thinking that there has to be someone. You know, there had been Wolfe Tone in his time, there'd been Parnell, everything, you know, there had to be someone. And when he met him, he really said he was really struck by him. You know, first of all, he said he was very handsome, but they stayed there from, say, 5 o'clock until 12 o'clock talking about everything. Things, but he read an awful lot about Wolfe Tone too, and Michael Collins and him were very much into Wolfe Tone. And I have a book that Michael gave him, Christmas 1919, and it's Michael gave him at Haddon Road. There was a whole network of them there. You know, it's not only them. There's a network. There were a whole lot of people that the reports went through.
Okay.
He was a very quiet man. Yeah. You know, in later years, but after all his glory before he was 50. My father, DMP Sergeant, Garda Commissioner in 11 years.
Yeah, that's some
job,
time, yeah. Ned Broy has mentioned to Mick when he met him about the danger of the village with a small party of police. They were a menace to volunteers going to such an isolated area. Collins and Broy agreed that ruthless war would be made on the small stations, attacking the barracks if the police were in them and burning them down where they had been evacuated. The RIC would then be compelled to concentrate on the larger towns and attempt to patrol the vacated areas from these distant centres. This concentration would cause the police to lose their grip, psychologically and otherwise, on the inhabitants of the vacated areas. Broy had also said that the next step was to take psychological war on the RIC from 2 angles. To get the local volunteers or their friends to tell young IRC men that now or never a chance existed to free the country, and that if they were not prepared to help, at least they should not hinder. After all these efforts had been made, a ruthless war was to be made on the hardcore that remained. As regards DMP, no attack should be made on the uniformed service, and no attack should be made on members of G Division who are not on political duty and active on that duty. In this way, the DMP would come to realise that once they did not display zeal against the volunteers, they were perfectly safe from attack. In the case of any G-man who remained hostile, a warning was to be given to him, such as tying him to a railing before any attack was made on him.
On the 22nd of January in Usk, which was a jail in Wales, USK, there were 4 guys, sprung. I mean, my feeling of all that time was that it didn't do the authorities any harm to not keep a huge eye out to let them escape. It became an embarrassment because the German plot was a total maker-up thing, you see. But anyway, the 4 guys got out of this place near Newport in Wales, and Collins was annoyed about that because, as his letters to Austin Sack in that show, because this could bloody well put them on guard.
Jailbreaks were an old IRB. That was a tradition. If you went to jail, they tried to get you out. And Collins really believed in that. And he was involved in jailbreaks. He tried to help everybody who went to jail, which is one of the reasons why the people loved him so much. He was involved in jailbreaks, as you mentioned right there, for Eamon de Valera out of prison right after the first Doyle. He was involved in a jailbreak from Strangeways Prison. He was involved in many jailbreaks from Mountjoy Prison. He just thought that as soon as you went in, you should know that I'm going to try and get you out.
And Sean McGarry and Deb were in Lincoln jail,
Yeah.
and they were quite key guys, the three of them.
Molly Mullen was asked, due to national importance, to go to Dublin docks and drop off a case to two men on a boat. She didn't know what was in the case. The two men turned out to be Michael Collins and Harry Boland. Unknowns to her was a rope to assist in the escape of De Valera at Lincoln Prison. It turned out this rope ladder was never used, as they used a key instead.
1919 found him outside the jail with a key which had been made from a wax impression that De Valera had taken. He heated candle wax while he was serving Mass.
Kathleen Boland, witness statement 586. The rescue of De Valera from Lincoln Jail. Mick and Harry went to Manchester and stayed with our aunt. They obtained a fur-lined coat from the Fenian Seamus Barrett, who owned a second-hand clothing shop for De Valera. My brother Jerry made keys to the pattern of one that was sent out on a Christmas card from Lincoln Jail. He made one from one of the blocks, gave it to Harry, and then sent the two other blocks to the prison in a Christmas cake, which was made by Mrs. Sean McGarry, and a file. De Lochry, Mayor of Kilkenny, who was a locksmith and a prisoner in Lincoln, made the key which enabled De Valera to escape.
It was arranged that, as well as getting out Eamon de Valera, Sean Mulroy and Sean McGarry would also escape. Collins and Boland, accompanied by Frank Kelly, came up the fields to the rear of the prison. They lay down in a field within sight of the prison window, and it was arranged that they would signal to the prisoners that they were ready by flashing a lamp, and that the prisoners would reply to this by lighting matches at a window. The prisoners gave the signal, and Collins and Boland proceeded towards the door. When they reached it, they found that outside the door there was a second iron gate. Collins had brought a duplicate key. He inserted this into the gate. It fitted easily enough, but as he attempted to turn it, it broke off in the lock. Collins had said in a heartbroken tone, "I've broken a key in the lock, Dev." De Valera thrust his own key into the lock from the other side. He managed to push out the broken key with his own, opening the gate. They made their way across the allotments towards Lincoln Christ Hospital. They went down Rugby Road.
He and Harry Boland, Maria, a fella and a girl, courting, went by a whole series. The walls of the prison apparently were used by a lot of courting couples for purposes better imagined than described, and they passed by a number of these couples who had more interest in each other than in the rather oddly shaped courting couples scurrying along behind them.
Yeah. They knew that the guards drank at the Peacock pub, so they hurried past. A taxi from the Adam and Eve waited to take the escapees out of the city. The escapees made their way to Worksop, to a safe house in Manchester. After travelling in the first taxi, they were brought to a second taxi. De Valera was taken to a popular priest house in Manchester, while Sean Mulroy and Sean McGarry were housed by McMahon. Milroy and McGarry were then taken to Liverpool. De Valera stayed in Manchester for 3 weeks before he then went to Liverpool, while Collins and Boland caught a train to London. After the daring escape, Collins spent the following day transacting business in London. He had then arrived in Liverpool, but he learnt that one of his sailor friends was crossing to Dublin that night. He decided to continue the journey. He was accompanied by Neil Kerr to a boat which was lying in Nelson's dock. In order to enter at that hour, they had to pass through a wicket in the gate, according to Pierce Beasley. This was guarded by a policeman and a customs officer. 3 detectives who were watching the Irish boat saw the 2 men from a distance. However, by the time they reached the boat, Collins was safely aboard and stowed away. They had inquired for the 2 mysterious men who had gone on board at that hour, but nobody could give them any information. And a search failed to locate the 2 men or anybody answering to that description.
De Valera was then brought into the Irish network of Manchester and hidden for some days. And he caused absolute consternation because he announced he was going to go to the States. He wasn't coming back.
That's right, Collins was the big do when Dave was going to come back, and he was like, no.
Yeah, when Collins went to talk to him, he found that he had this worked out in jail. He'd get much more publicity in the States.
Yeah. And
he wasn't coming back to Dublin, and Collins was thunderstruck because he thought the publicity value of having him show up in Dublin after this escape was going to be lost. And, they had to send Cathal Bua over to convince him to come back because it would be looked upon as if he was. In fact, some people did say to him, "You're getting out ahead of the trouble." It was one of the big early sources of tension between Collins and De Valera.
On February the 8th, Sean Theo Kelly arrived in Paris. He was hoping with an Irish delegation to get a hearing for the Irish government at Versailles, the Paris Peace Conference, but he was refused. At the first meeting of GAHQ of the Irish Volunteers, Cathal Bua had said that a new situation had arisen and that new methods must be employed. He said volunteers had now become the army of a lawfully constituted government elected by the people and were entitled morally and legally, when on the execution of their duty, to slay the officials and agents of the foreign invader who was waging war upon our native government. He also declared we were entitled to put to death all spies, informers and all Irishmen who acted as agents of the foreigners. Also in February, Collins' Longford application was made for forfeiture of the bail given on his release from Sligo jail the previous April.
He had been arrested and released on bail and never turned up to his trial for making a alleged seditious speech in Granard. He was wary that if there was any opportunity to enforce a bench warrant against him, he'd have been picked up.
He wrote later to Austin Stack, "I believe they're on my track again. I'm sick of it." Gearóid O'Sullivan introduced him to Mrs. Leigh Doyle, who lived in Rathgar. He would have to stay in many safe houses to avoid arrest.
He was a very complex fellow.
Absolutely.
And that perhaps then suggestions of mood swings and that. Yeah. Maybe he was very intelligent and very sensitive, and he wasn't a good sleeper. He certainly slept hardly at all in that Sligo jail.
Your father said to me that he used to write letters till 2 in the morning.
Yeah.
And maybe it was, as you said, it was, look, what made him was he was a workhorse. He was just so committed, and he was just a brilliant, dedicated workhorse. And maybe the tiredness of staying awake till 3 a.m. writing letters, and the fact that he was, sleeping on a different couch for 3 years.
He was writing these letters, and as soon as Michael was shot, Nancy used to say, his letters became valuable archival stuff, and we know that a lot of the stuff that Marjorie Forrester uses came out of the black box that I spoke to you about, that I had sorted out, into bundles and so on at the time when I was down in the house.
On March 4th, the US House of Representatives votes 261 to 41 for a resolution expressing an earnest hope that the peace conference in Paris would favourably consider the claims of Ireland to self-determination. And the annual commemoration concert for the death of Robert Emmet was held in the Mansion House on March the 4th. It was usually organised by the IRB under the guise of the Wolfe Tone Memorial Committee. It was announced that a lecture would be delivered by a well-known Republican. There was a large audience, though many were predicting it would be De Valera. The lecturer who appeared on the platform was Sean McGarry, who had also escaped from Lincoln Jail. He delivered his lecture and disappeared. There were detectives waiting outside and only learnt of his presence from the newspapers the next day. Pierce Beasley was arrested on the same night. On March 6th, Pierce McCann, a member of Dáil Éireann, died in Gloucestershire Jail. Nearly all Irish prisoners were in jail, despite protests from Ireland. Influenza was ravaging through the jails. That night, the House of Commons announced that it would release the Irish internees, among them Constance Markievicz, the only woman elected to Parliament and member of Dáil Éireann. Also notable figures such as Arthur Griffith, William T. Cosgrave and Darrell Figgis. After the release of these prisoners, De Valera wasn't in as much danger to be arrested. He was still in hiding. Sinn Féin had immediately announced that he would be offered a public welcome. The plan was for the Lord Mayor to receive him and escort him to the Mansion House. British Chief Secretary to Ireland, Ian Macpherson, issued a proclamation against the proposed demonstration for De Valera. De Valera felt that there were many difficulties in the matter, including putting civilian life in danger. I think you must all agree with me that the present occasion is scarcely one on which we would be justified in risking the lives of the citizens. Many a heavy fish is caught even with a fine line if the angler is patient.
So on the night of the 16th of March, Barton's escape was arranged from here. He'd been put away for making a seditious speech out in Carnew in County Wicklow. Collins wanted him out. They had plans for the guy.
Robert Barton had been in Mountjoy jail. He was arrested for a speech where he threatened reprisals for ill treatment of prisoners in Mountjoy, and he had got permission from GHQ to proceed with the escape.
Dick Mulcahy had managed to sneak in through communications with a warder named Joe Berry. He was able to sort out a meeting where he could sneak a file to Barton. Barton was wearing riding gear, riding breeches, so he was able to hide the file there. So he brought it back up to his cell, and then it was arranged via Joe Berry that on the night of the 16th of March that the escape would take place.
Barton had been moved to a ground floor cell and had sawed through a bar in his window. It took him 3 nights. He had rigged up a dummy figure in his bed, so any warder looking through the spy hole would imagine he was still there.
But he also left a note to the warder saying thanks very much to the chief warder. The lads were very nice, but the accommodation, a 12 foot by 6 foot cell, isn't quite to my liking. So he left. He went outside into the yard just behind this wall over here, and there was a pre-arranged signal where Rory O'Connor, or one of the volunteers who was with him, would throw a bar of soap over the wall.
Volunteers thus threw over a weight with a rope attached. He pulled over a rope ladder and he ascended the wall.
He wasn't able to use the rope ladder to get back down because he didn't have anybody to hold it for him on the other side. So he had to take a jump down. So 3 or 4 volunteers held out a rug to try and absorb his fall as best they could. So that's what he did. He jumped down, landed in the rug. When he collected himself, he was missing his glasses. He couldn't find his glasses, but they weren't going to hang around to look for them. So they whisked him out of there as quickly as they could. They got him around the corner to where Michael Collins was waiting for him. Collins then got him brought up to Bat O'Connor's house that night out in Donnybrook, where he was given a very, very warm welcome.
All the arrangements for his escape was carried out by Michael Collins. Bat O'Connor had explained how delighted he was at the escape of Barton. Collins replied, "That's only the beginning. We're going to get Beasley and Fleming out next."
One of Che Guevara's, and he very often quoted things that trace exactly back to the Irish War of Independence. One of his was, "You come out of every ambush with more ammunition and weapons than you went into it." That's exactly where the Irish got a great many of their weapons.
He was very close with Dick McKay. He was very close. Yeah.
In May 1917, Major Douglas of the 84th Royal Flying Corps chose the site to be a permanent airfield. So by the time of the raid in March 1919, the site is still under construction. So you've got over 800 civilians working on the site, and quite a lot of these are volunteers. You've got Paddy Breslin, Paddy Houlihan. The 24th Training Squadron was based at the site, and it had a guard of the 2nd Battalion Gordon Highlanders. Initially the job was a 1st Battalion Irish Volunteers job, and then when Dick McKee heard about it, he made a brigade job, Dublin Brigade job. So he put his full weight behind it, the planning and everything. Michael Lynch has managed to gather together 3 cars. They're short though, so one is being liberated or commandeered, whatever you want to call it, at that point. So there's 25 men of the A&F companies of the 1st Battalion. They're going to take part in this raid now. They're led by Patrick Houlihan. He's the officer in charge, and Paddy Breslin, who's the 2nd in command. They all brought their own weapons to the meeting. It was in Parnell Square, and but they're told no, you're not using those, you're using these, and they're issued with trench daggers. The trench daggers are a blade with a knuckle duster on the handle, and then they're issued revolvers or automatics as well. Dick McKee keeps saying to them, "You've got to try and have a bloodless victory." They didn't, at this stage, they were trying not to kill British soldiers as such. The 2 guard dogs on the Collinstown aerodrome, they are Airsdale hounds. Now, they were drugged earlier in the day by Sean Doyle and Patrick Houlihan, so theoretically they should be dead. But on the routes that they're travelling to the aerodrome, volunteers are starting to appear on street corners. Their orders are basically, it's not so much to guard them on the way out, it's on the way back. George Fitzgerald, Patrick Houlihan, and a couple of others all dressed up in British Army uniforms. Houlihan and Fitzgerald in staff officers, and then the attack is launched, a silent attack. Both groups now, as soon as they come into the boundaries of the aerodrome, have to crawl nearly over 200 yards over open ground with the guard hut in front of them. So they expect 2 guards, and when they reach the hut, there's only 1 guard that they can see, and Tom Merrigan takes care of him. And Patrick Houlihan is standing there waiting, looking for him. Remember, he's in a staff officer's uniform. He's looking for the other guard, and there's no sign of him. George Fitzgerald as well, he's at the back, he's standing up as well, and next thing, the 2 dogs that are supposed to be dead come running out towards him. So he's pulled his trench dagger, and he thinks he's going to have to finish these 2 dogs off. Well, they come up and they're licking his hands, and he did realise that these 2 dogs looked very drugged up, and then they legged it back into their kennels and probably went back asleep for the night. So by this point, Patrick Houlihan has had enough of waiting, and he just goes at them, get at them, and then the front is breached the front of the guardhouse is breached. George Fitzgerald steams in the back. All the men that are lying on the cots, the British soldiers that are lying on the cots, suddenly see a staff officer jump up to attention, and then next thing there's loads, just the room is filling with volunteers all armed. So they start tying up all these soldiers. Then they straight away they're taking the 75 rifles, the Enfield rifles there's loads of ammunition for it as well. Patrick Holohan leads the second group. He calls numbers out, and they follow him. Now their job is to try and commandeer 2 vehicles and destroy the rest. When they get there, they realise they can't start any of the vehicles, so they just basically knock all the engine blocks off. So once it was all done, all the men were tied up, all the soldiers I should say are tied up, everything basically Holohan calls it, time to get out of here. They have to transport, they haven't got the vehicles to transport the weapons, so 2 of the cars have to reverse up to the guardhouse.
And there's also another attempt in Mountjoy where they get a number of the Dublin Brigade out and over the wall while they're playing a football match. Now, these jailbreaks aren't just propaganda events.
Yeah.
It's an attempt by Collins to get key members who he needs for their operations out.
Yeah.
They need De Valera to be out campaigning, to be a public voice. They need key members of the Dublin Brigade out.
So on the 29th of March, the escape that had been pre-arranged, it took place here. Along here we had Padder Clancy, Joe O'Reilly and several others who came along, and from the far side of the canal there they had a signal to Paddy Daly, who was in one of the wings here overlooking the canal.
One of the organiser for the on the inside for the Mountjoy jailbreak was Paddy O'Daly. Paddy O'Daly's first wife was dying at the time, and she had contracted cancer, and he was given sympathetic release periodically to go and visit her in a hospice, which he did. And while he was out, he used the opportunity to meet with Michael Collins and to organise those jailbreaks.
Daly quickly made his way down into the exercise yard while the volunteers made their way across the lock gate here so they could be in position on this side. Daly made his way down into the yard with Pádraig Fleming and Pierce Beasley. There was a game of football going on in the yard. It was freezing cold. There was also snowfall, and it was getting on towards the evening. The reason why they chose Saturday evening was because there was going to be less warders on duty. Clancy and them came up along here on the Whitworth Road side, right? They would have had to be in that towpath there, because if you look onto the Whitworth Road itself, it's too low. So when Daly got out into the yard, the lads that were helping them escape, they came along here. They had 3 bicycles with them as well for the 3 men that they were planning to break out. At one point, a weight was thrown over. There was a rope ladder attached to the weight. Pádraig Fleming, who was nicknamed Samson, he wouldn't have been long picking it up and yanking the rope ladder over. Now, while this was happening, Daly and a couple of others, they went over. They had these long spoons that they put in handkerchiefs and held them as if they were revolvers, and they went over to the guards and they held them up. Now, it has to be said, some of the guards were quite friendly, Joe Berry again being one of them, who was also very, very helpful here, but there was also others who were a little bit less compliant. One of them got a sharp punch in the jaw, and that made him compliant, but there was others who they were helping, but they asked to be roughed up a little bit as well. Ultimately, there was about 20 or so volunteers in the exercise yard, and they managed to get over the wall here. And once they got over the wall, this section of the towpath here, this is the furthest point in the prison from its main entrance, which is an ideal spot obviously for an escape. The lighting wouldn't have been as bright at the time. It would have been getting dark. It was evening. Plus, they could make their way down along here, and they could just become absorbed into all the terraces down here. One of the men who escaped was Liam Tannum. He was a prominent 1916 veteran. He had to cycle away on one of the bicycles that was punctured. He eventually got to a safe house over in Bagot Street. Later on, Beasley, JJ Walsh and Pádraig Fleming, they were taken to various safe houses around the city by Joe O'Reilly, and then eventually Joe O'Reilly went to meet Collins in the Wicklow Hotel over on Wicklow Street.
19 prisoners escaped. Collins was waiting for news of the jailbreak at the Wicklow Hotel. Joe O'Reilly cycled there to give them the news. When Collins asked, "Is Fleming out?" O'Reilly answered, "The whole jail is out." O'Reilly recalls that Collins would burst out laughing every so often at their success and impudence, recounting the sentence, "The whole jail is out." The second jailbreak in Mountjoy in March 1919 was a major PR coup for Republicans. It was also an embarrassment to those who ran Mountjoy prison.
In all the papers and letters that Michael left behind, and their volume, range and detail reveal a colossus of a man. We were talking about mood swings, a huge output of work, you know, that baffling, you know, that how could such a young man produce so much in such a short time?
April, Paris. The purpose of the 3 American delegates from Friends of Irish Freedom, Edward Dunn, Frank Walsh, Michael Ryan, was to obtain for the delegates selected by the people of Ireland a hearing at the peace conference. They requested President Wilson to obtain from the British government safe conduct for Eamon de Valera, Arthur Griffith and Count Plunkett. The President replied he would not be able to give the matter his consideration for some time.
On 6th of April 1919 in Croke Park, Tipperary played Wexford in Gaelic football to raise money for the Irish National Aid and Volunteers Dependence Fund. Collins and De Valera threw in the ball and Harry Boland was the referee.
He did hide in plain sight.
Yeah.
He was influenced by Joseph Plunkett gave him one of the.
Oh,
the
yes.
man who was Thursday. Was it by Chesterton or by Conrad?
It was G.K. Chesterton.
The man who was Thursday. Yeah.
Yeah, but even like there's a photo of the doll. I know it's not in January, but in April or May, and like he's there and he's like this. He's looking very angry. But like they were all named, and I for the life of me, like I totally get there were people who didn't know who he was and he was hiding in plain sight, absolutely. But there had to be a few who were just, let's not go there, lads. This is a job. I have a family. I have kids. You know.
Well, more than a few.
Yeah.
I would say that was a very major factor in it.
You asked the question earlier about how did he get along without being arrested. A great many people just simply said, we're not going to do that.
Everything. I think he even encouraged him about wearing the suit and being a businessman.
Yeah, better to wear a suit because he was wearing leggings and buttons and jackets and everything like that. He'd pass much easier dressed as a businessman, which would be loads of them around Dublin at the time, I suppose.
So that's why he went around this Cavalier way, you know, on the bike as an ordinary citizen. People perceived him as an ordinary citizen.
I think he mentioned as well, it was a way of keeping himself sane because if you're constantly being hunted, you're constantly stressed out, tense and being watched.
He was outside Brunswick Street, I don't know whether he was in uniform or on duty, but he was standing outside on the far side of the road to Brunswick Street Station, and he looks over to Butt Bridge, and who does he see cycling towards him in an immaculate suit and everything on him, and a briefcase and everything, cycled up Butt Street, up Brunswick Street, past him. he said, later years, he said, I hoped he wasn't going to say hello to me, but he didn't. He sailed past and ignored him off up Dame Street. And at the next meeting, they went and they used to meet a lot in Haddon Road with Tommy Gay. And he said that Michael said to him, I saw you there on duty.
Tommy Gay, unfortunately, doesn't get enough credit.
Oh, he doesn't. No, he doesn't. He's one. I've got a whole chapter about him in my book.
So I was read he was a small, unassuming man. You wouldn't suspect,
that was another place they used to meet, Capel Street Library, which is gone now.
And there were information would go through 2, 3, 4 hands before it got to Collins, and this protected everybody. Quality of the information he was getting, and the quantity of it. He was getting a huge amount of information. And this really did give him an advantage. Sure. Certainly initially.
He had to undermine the intelligence source.
Yeah.
That was the whole key.
Okay, in April 1919, Michael Collins gained access to the police files here in what was then Central Police Station in Brunswick Street. Today it's Pearse Street Garda Station, but this was the headquarters of G Division. This was where the grey matter of everything that they had in relation to the volunteers. All their intelligence files were the ones that weren't in Dublin Castle.
But Brunswick Street, which we now know as Pearse Street, was where the RSC records were kept.
Yeah.
And the point of getting in to inspect them was it showed Collins how the system worked.
Yeah.
What the RSC did. And what they did was, roughly speaking, they put everything they knew about what was happening in the area, people, events, into their reports, which then went to Dublin, where the special branch, the political police, inspected them, and they were able to say, oh yes, so and so in this district is a troublemaker or a potential leader. And if he came to Dublin, the special branch men were onto him. They were able to pounce. They watched railway stations, which are the big place for people coming from the country.
He arranged for Michael to come in, but Michael met Sean Noonan on the way around and said where he was going, so they went together.
Okay. Now, what do you think was going through? I mean, if he was caught having brought them in, he would have been hung, wouldn't he?
Yeah. A lot of people say he was very brave to do that.
Yeah.
But I think, he wanted to help, and Michael's so persuasive.
Yeah.
He wanted to actually see the files, He brought him into the room where the files were. I mean, up the stairs, and the place, the whole, what would you call it, station was full of DMP men.
Well, Collins got access to them in early April 1919. He was led in by Ned Bry. He spent the best part of a full night in there by candlelight and by torch, perusing, looking through the files that the DMP, the Dublin Metropolitan Police, had on him and his organisation, and it was very disconcerting to him to see the information that they had.
He discovered the extent of the knowledge that the police had. In every hamlet in Ireland they had a spy, or they had local sympathisers, and it showed him how to defeat the system.
So why did Collins consider the RIC the real threat and not the British Army?
Because a lot of them were Irish, and they had been, I mean, you just think about it. If you're a policeman on the beat or an intelligence officer working for say police intelligence, and you're moving around a city or a country or a particular area, you get to know the characters, you get to know their movements, so this personal knowledge, the RIC, a grave threat to the Republican movement, and in particular I suppose their identification of key members after 1916 had got them executed. So it was their ability to identify, their ability to move within the city, because people were afraid of them, remember. At this point. That's why.
He saw, as many did, but Collins positively set about it, was he saw that the British always won because they had greater intelligence. They knew what the enemy were doing. And by undermining that.
But you read the reports, they're highly effective. They detail everything that is said, who says it, where they meet, how many attended, how the funding that they get, who donates what at meetings. Now they could only get that kind of information with touts on the other side as well. So each individual policeman or detective had his own informants. Right? So for Collins, you cut them out and you blind the British establishment, because it's a lot harder for them to fit in because of their accent, their mannerisms, their bearing. It's all different.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's all different.
As far as Collins was concerned, you know, the Dáil was the representative government of the Irish people. They'd been elected to that, and this was now an enemy force that was seeking to penetrate that. When he saw the level of information that they had, this was, you know, a big catalyst into his realisation that he needed to take preventative action to stop them from gaining further penetrations.
He even would have been pointed in the right direction in terms of what documents to look at.
All the files and everything. I'd say like Jordan did in the film. I'd say that's what it was like. The room was like that, you know, with the layers of the files and everything. I mean, he spent hours there, you know, until early morning.
Yeah, that's about 5 in the morning, I think.
He found his own file. Of course, they all talk about that.
Collins read his own file. It stated he belongs to a family of brainy people and of advanced Sinn Féin sympathies. They are of the farming class. Collins had given such a good loud laugh. Broy heard him and was concerned that Collins would be discovered. See just how dangerous it was for Eamon Broy and what he was doing with this. I mean,
how are you going to explain Michael Collins in the middle of a TMP station?
He was lost,
Small number of political detectives at the end who got this information sift through. And as he said, the British could always replace a soldier or somebody of that order, but the new man can't step into the dead man's shoes and his knowledge.
You know, and they even slept upstairs in the dormitory. He had the foresight to lock the door of the dormitory, so they couldn't get out. I don't know what happened if they wanted to go to the bathroom.
Because the typical Irish thing, there was an element of farce in it. They were nearly discovered. A drunk started. He was released, but insisted in causing trouble and started throwing stones at the window. So instead of the place all being quiet, suddenly, you know, the hits on spare, the cops running around the place, arresting this Ludo man and bringing him in. And in Tirali, they nearly captured Michael Collins.
Was that kind of when he got the idea of setting up the squad? Was from that, or did he have it before that? You know?
Oh no, it would have been from that.
From the night looking at the files in here, this was when things began to really ratchet up in terms of the war that was being declared on the DMP, the RIC, and particularly the detectives of G Division. It was, as far as they were concerned, it was time to take them out, and this was where the warnings came into it. They were sent warnings to back off. The same thing applied to general just policemen in the Dublin area. They were told, if you want to go and do traffic duties, if you want to check burglaries out, whatever, go ahead and do that, but you stay away from the government, the elected government of the country. If you're going to interfere with us, we're going to come after you.
Collins took with him a DMP daybook. He had the entire modus operandi of the British police in Ireland laid out before him. Collins wrote to his sister Helena, who'd become a nun, "We go from success to success in our own guerrilla way. Escapes of prisoners, raids against the enemy, etc." On April 9th, under the orders of Michael Collins, steps were taken by volunteers to warn hostile G-men. Detective officer at Halley's home was raided by volunteers, and Detective Officer O'Brien was held up in the street. He was gagged, tied with ropes, and left there. This was the beginning of psychological warfare on the G-men. detectives such as Sergeant Smith and Daniel Hoey disregarded all warnings. They persisted in their work against the volunteers.
There was no central crime. I mean, the next guy was Martin O'Brien, the RIC man who was shot. At the time they were trying to release the hunger striker down in Limerick.
During the morning of May 9th, Ned Bry telephoned to warn the Dáil would be raided that afternoon in an effort to capture Collins and a few others. Bry had given the warning to Beasley in French. Collins had sent Joe O'Reilly to fetch his uniform.
This place was raided again. Journalists had been invited, they were trying to get these American delegates that, to come from the Paris Peace Conference, so they actually succeeded. So they had these 3 or 4 American representatives that had come to see what was going on in Dublin, and just as they were coming here to come into the Mansion House, their arrival coincided with the arrival of a British and a police raid on the Mansion House. So needless to say, these guys got treated to a very entertaining hour or so while the building inside was ransacked. But while this happened, Michael Collins, who was one of their targets, he'd managed to evade them.
Collins describes the raid to Austin Stack in a letter 2 days later. At about 5 o'clock, the enemy came along with 3 motor lorries, small armoured car machine guns, probably 200 or 250 troops. They surrounded the building with great attention to every military detail. They entered the Mansion House and searched it with great care and thoroughness, but they got nobody inside. The wanted ones codded them again. They were up a long ladder into a neighbouring building.
They never got a hold of him. There was a load of others here. Sean McLaughlin, who had come to prominence in the Rising and afterwards in Richmond Barracks. He narrowly avoided the clutches of detectives Hoey and Barton. But the raid took place, huge furore, and in the heel of the hunt, they didn't get who they were looking for. The police and the military, they backed off. And the American representatives, they hung around. Obviously they wanted to see what was going on, have a nice entertaining evening. It had been pretty good so far, but to cap off their evening, they were treated to the vision of Michael Collins, this guy who was now rapidly developing a sort of an elusive Pimpernel sort of a persona around them. Well, he arrived out in full volunteer uniform, and this just showed these Americans that it was a very, very good example of what was soon the stage that was being set, where British intelligence military were going to be consistently outmaneuvered by people who had a lot more imagination and a much bigger flair for public relations.
Liam Tobin was actually the director of Collins was the director of intelligence, and Liam Tobin was his immediate person doing all the intelligence work before. He did it right over here in Crow Street. He was extremely good at this analysis of intelligence I talked about before. Crow Street, of course, was Collins' #1 intelligence office, and I don't think Collins was ever there. He was smart enough not to go any place around there. But that was the #1 intelligence office they had.
Can you tell me about Collins' intelligence department?
Sure. Initially, the intelligence was carried out by Collins himself, and then with Liam Tobin and Frank Thornton, who were very, very close to him. Cullen was another one. Now, initially, they operated themselves, and they carried out their own intelligence.
Frank Thornton has said, "A good intelligence officer is born, not made." But even a man with a great deal of natural instinct for detective work requires to be taught a great deal of the technique of the business. Collins has also written around this time, "Everybody should know that it is by naked force that England holds this country."
But Collins was really the one who brought in ammunition and arms from everywhere. Great many from Great Britain, the UK. He sent people to Germany for them. He sent people to Italy to try to get them. And there were others who were gun runners under Michael Collins. One of the most famous gun runners was working in Germany, where his family had had contacts for many, many years. It was one of the most brilliant gun runners the IRA ever had. The IRA called him Bobby Briscoe. You know him as Robert Briscoe, TD, the Lord Mayor of Dublin.
During the War of Independence, Sam was so crucial to the effort in terms of supply. Sam was Michael's key man in London, and there was a couple of occasions where information was so privy and so secure that Sam used to get the train them both back and deliver it in person to him. So that's how trusted Sam was by Michael.
When writing to a brigade commander on 17th of May 1919, Collins has said, "When you ask me for ammunition for guns which have never fired a shot in this fight, my answer is a simple one. Fire shots at some useful target or get the hell out of it." On 17th of May, he had also complained to Austin Stack about Sinn Féin politicians making things intolerable for militants like himself. The policy now seems to be to squeeze out anyone who's tainted with strong fighting ideas, or should I say, the utility of fighting. He had felt that the Sinn Féin moderates were all talk and thinkers.
It was now almost 4 months since the ambush at Solohead Beg. During that time, we had been sleeping wherever and whenever we got the chance.
On Tracy and Dunbreen, after they had the ambush at Solohead Beg, they pretty much had to go on their own, so you had the big four. And Collins fully supported them. That's where you have the relationship being very strong between Collins and important between Collins and the likes of Dunbreen and Sean Tracy, because he is the buffer between the political side and the IRA GHQ and then the fellows on the ground.
And the same thing was about the RSC. Now the initial difficulty with Solohead Beg and not long on that was that any centralised control wasn't there.
Sean Hogan, one of the big four who was involved in the Solohead Beg ambush in January,
was awakened to cries that the peelers are raiding the house.
Sean Tracy, Dan Breen and Seamus Robinson contacted the Galbally Battalion of the East Limerick Brigade.
Now, what Breen and Tracy and Robinson, everyone knows, is that anyone that's captured in tourists, they're not taken to Dublin, they're taken to Cork. They contact then the Limerick Brigade, and they eventually send them 5 men from Galbally.
Ned O'Brien, James Scanlon, J.J. O'Brien, Sean Lynch and Ed Foley of Galbally promptly arrived at Emley Station. Another volunteer, Gertie McCarthy from Thurles, travelled on a train from Thurles to identify Hogan.
Sean Hogan, who's on the train, he's surrounded. He's got Sergeant Wallace on one side. He's got two constables in front of him, Ring and O'Reilly. Now he spots something out the corner of his eye, like someone he recognises. So he's ready. He knows something's coming. Tracy and O'Brien get on the train, steam into the carriage, shouting, right, hands up, whatever, surrender. Hogan off the train, and all hell breaks loose then.
They escape from the train after a violent vicious struggle.
Still a rifle there now. He grabs that rifle and he comes out firing. Now everyone is scattering off these trains. Even these Cork volunteers, they're scattering like, and that this is you get a gun battle between Breen and Constable O'Reilly.
May 9th. The delegates visited Ireland and Mountjoy Prison. On the way to a reception at the Mansion House, they were stopped by the British military, who refused De Valera to pass. The three delegates returned to Paris and submitted their report on conditions in Ireland, referencing the frequency of arrests and ill treatment of prisoners. They concluded, "We sincerely urge, if the Peace Conference refuses a hearing to the people of Ireland, the guilt for the commission of these monstrous crimes and atrocities, as well as the bloody revolution which may follow, be shared with Great Britain by the members of the Peace Conference." The delegates wanted a commission to investigate the conditions in Ireland under the British regime. May 17th. De Valera, Arthur Griffith and Count Plunkett write a letter to Monsieur Clemenceau repudiating Britain's claim to speak for Ireland.
As Minister for Finance, Collins had to organise funds. He was to draft the prospectus for the national loan. He was irritated at De Valera's habit of mulling or stalling over every word. Collins had also wished to include a Dáil pledge to honour Fenian bonds floated in 1866, but De Valera compelled him to drop this from the prospectus.
May 26th. Official statement of Ireland's case for independence is sent by the Republican government to the Peace Conference.
Collins and Boland both stayed in Granard often, and even came to stay at the Kiernan's lakeside home. Kitty had continued her relationship with Harry Boland, and he was going to ask her to marry him when De Valera asked him to accompany him to America in June 1919. On the day he left for America, Harry wrote to her telling her that he had spent the night before with Collins. As I had to catch the 7:35 a.m. train, I bade him goodbye, only to find him at Kingsbridge as fresh as a daisy to see me off. I need not say to you how much I love him, and I know he has a warm spot in his heart for me. And I feel sure no matter what matter our triangle may work out, he and I shall always be friends.
Kathleen Boland, witness statement 586. Off to America. May 1919, Harry went to Manchester and succeeded in getting a job as a stoker on a boat. When he arrived safely in America on the 8th of June, he was met by Jim McGee and Jim Gleason, who saw him safely through the customs. He was carrying, in one of his specially made seaman's boots, the text of Ireland's claim to independence. He had been sent to America to start a publicity campaign for the Dáil loan and to blaze the trail for De Valera.
Boland's mission in the USA was to prime the existing networks of Irish organisations, secret and open, to mobilise in support of a future public campaign. De Valera arrived in the USA clandestinely. No one knew he was coming. In fact, it was reported that Harry nearly had a fit when he found out De Valera was on board ship. Boland, instead of acting as envoy in his own right, became De Valera's valet, shepherd and manager. When Harry Boland had left for America, Hannah Sheehy Skeffington replaced him as the Sinn Féin national chairman. Collins was appalled, not only because she was a woman, but also because she was more moderate than Boland.
The Sinn Féin party had also gone on to announce that his replacement was necessary as he was out of the country. Collins was furious at this. He said, "Our people give away in a moment what the detective division had been unable to find out in 5 weeks."
The G-men, the Dublin Metropolitan Police member, have been looking for that information for months, and there they just go up to one of these half-wits and they get it in 5 seconds. You know, that sort of... so the secrecy element was very much part of Collins. But that's where that personality thing comes in, of Collins not taking fools gladly.
And then in June of that year, Collins arrived. Actually, it was his birthday. They were planning a celebration from poor Sinead, his wife, and the kids.
Yeah.
And Collins turned up and said, "We've got a place in a boat for you." So he downed tools, dropped all the celebrations and headed off.
Yeah. Collins had arranged through Liverpool contacts to have De Valera smuggled to America. De Valera left Ireland for the United States on 1st of June 1919. He was brought first of all to Britain and then stowed away on the SS Lapland, which went from Liverpool to New York. He was seasick for most of the 8-day voyage as he was holed up in a tiny cabin. De Valera's aims of visiting America was recognition of the Irish Republic as well as collecting money. The Irish Americans were beginning to split, and De Valera had hoped to resolve their dispute. The Friends of Irish Freedom were calling for a recognition of Ireland's right to self-determination, while its critics were insisting that the call should be for recognition of the Irish Republic as a legitimate government.
That was June of 1919.
Yeah.
He didn't reappear in Dublin until the trouble was nearly over. He came back for Christmas of 1920.
Yeah, I know.
Missed the Black and Hands, practically Black and Hand War.
When Dev was in America, Michael Collins used to pop down to Greystones as often as he could to make sure that Sinead De Valera was okay for supplies.
This confirmed the resolution passed by Congress in March 4th. June 11th. President Wilson receives the American delegates in Paris. The meeting was distressing. President Wilson informed Walsh that there was an agreement among the Committee of Four, comprising of Lloyd George of Britain, Orlando of Italy, Clemenceau of France, and Wilson of the US, that no small nation should appear before it without the unanimous consent of the whole committee. He permitted England counter the demand of his own electorate and to veto Ireland's claim. All Irish hopes of a hearing at Versailles came to an end. June 17th. Arthur Griffith, acting president, announces in the Dáil that the president, De Valera, has by and with the advice of the ministry gone on a mission abroad. The Victory Fund in America had collected hundreds of thousands of dollars from the Irish Americans. John Devoy and Judge Callaghan wished the money to stay in America, while Joe McGarrity wanted it to go to Ireland. De Valera wished to reconcile the two. He also wished to float the Dáil Éireann external loan to secure recognition of the Irish Republic from the USA and to secure America's help for Ireland in matters relating to the League of Nations. The fourth session of the Dáil decreed the establishment of national arbitration courts in every county.
Thomas MacDonagh's brother John MacDonagh was a filmmaker. And now they've mentioned other names of people who were doing the filming of that scene up at St. Enda's of the first loan, with well-known personalities lining up to sign up to the first loan.
Yeah.
You know, in July of 1919.
Yeah.
You were saying about the Dáil loan. He had a terrific strategy.
Yeah.
And he was a good guy with the money.
Yeah.
June 19th. The Dáil approves the first Dáil loan.
In Patrick Pearse's School of St. Enda's, Collins would make a short film advertising the Dáil loan. Many newspapers were shut down and censored because they published adverts to do with the Dáil loan. So Collins decided to use the new medium of film. Many notable Irish Republicans were invited to buy bonds. They included Kathleen Clark, Margaret Pearse, mother of Patrick Pearse, Grace Plunkett, widow of Joseph Plunkett, and Arthur Griffith.
And it wasn't heavily publicised, you see, because it was totally illegal.
Yeah.
But that wonderful footing of Arthur Griffith and others lining up with Collins taking the money and so on.
Michael Collins and Dermot O'Hegarty sat in front of the steps of St. Enda's and signed bond certificates on the block on which Robert Emmet had been beheaded in 1803. His men would take copies of the film and force cinema operators to show it, then carefully take it away with them before it could be confiscated. The film was also shown in the US. This brought Collins' name and image before the public. An interesting note is that he would deliberately look away from the camera until 1921 in order to blur his image. He was always conscious of the camera. However, he was clearly visible in this film and therefore put himself in danger to authorities.
You know the way they say that Collins wasn't known, you know, like his face during the War of Independence, but yet there's video of him in the Dáil loans video in 1919 and 1920 and it was shown in cinemas.
That's a very good point, yeah.
So is it a case that maybe they did know but they didn't just let on? You know, they can't have been that stupid, Dublin Metropolitan, not stupid, but like, I mean, they can't have been that ignorant of the fact that there's video of Collins going around to all the different cinemas. There's a photograph of him with the first Dáil in 1919. Like,
well, the story, that's a very good point, is that we hear most stories I've heard, I could be wrong here, of when he does act the Mick, he acts it with the English soldiers. Yeah, he more of acts it the Mick with the English soldiers, and maybe that he knew that the Dublin Metropolitan Police and the lower levels of the RIC, because it wasn't apartheid, Marcus. If you look at the structure of the police, like the top high rankings of the RIC and Dublin Metropolitan Police were like 85% Protestants, and the lower rankings were maybe 60 or 70%. And were they just doing it, you know, to feed their families. Did they actually?
That's
Yeah, and maybe they actually said we'd be better off under Collins. Or we'd be taken out in our families. Yeah.
Could have been just stupidity. The DMP certainly they weren't going to risk being assassinated by giving them away.
Yeah.
He had the special branch fellows eliminated. So they should have been able to cut a clip out of that. I could never follow myself why they didn't.
Yeah.
We'll all try and come to terms after 3 years, Marcus, of 100 years on, to see where Collins was coming from, because there's one thing, his administrative ability, his ability to write notes about everything wasn't just, well, I want to record a history because I'm going to be shot at age 31 and they'll want things to write about, you know.
June 23rd. District Inspector Hunt of the RIC was shot dead by men using revolvers. They wore no disguise. June 24th. Irish bishops in Maynooth issued a statement that described the British regime as the rule of the sword, utterly unsuited to a civilised nation and extremely provocative. The acts of violence spring from this cause and from this cause alone. June 24th. The Manchester Guardian admitted, "It cannot be denied that women and men have been arrested and detained for long periods without trial, that the imprisonment fatally broke the health of a few of them and destroyed the reason of others, that scores of other political prisoners sentenced by court-martial have been in conflict with the prison authorities, that police truncheons, firemen's hoses, handcuffed behind back for several days, including days of solitary confinement in punishment cells, have been used to reduce them to subjection, that the conflict still goes on and the end is not in sight. The cost of England's Army of Occupation in Ireland was £10,800,000 per year."
Michael Collins can be seen photographed in June at the wedding of Paddy O'Donoghue. Paddy O'Donoghue was head of the Irish Republican Army in Manchester. He was a close friend of Michael Collins, who was his best man when Paddy married Violet Gore. O'Donoghue was involved in intelligence and arms smuggling in England as early as 1917.
Oh, Ireland, you beauty, I hope you understand my graph for this country, the people and the land. I try to end the tyranny of 800 years. Then the empire got down on one and he bowed to Irish peers. Oh, my name is Michael Collins, and the rebel County Cork, where I learned an Irish vocation, how to stand up and to talk. I came toe to toe with an empire, with a pen in my hand. Signed my life away for Ireland.